Well, anyway, between one of these devices, we should get something that we can share on the web for people that can't be here today. So what I'm wanting to do today is to focus on basically the physical geography of Palestine, or the Holy Land. Now, straight away, we can see or Israel, so we're going to trip over all those issues, try and put them aside. The Holy Land is actually bigger than Israel and or Palestine, because it also includes Jordan and parts of southern Lebanon, and really into Damascus, up into Syria as far as Damascus, and technically the Old Testament down as far as Egypt, because that's part of the story. But if we're talking about the primary geographical focus, then the traditional way of saying is from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. That's Palestine geographically. In political terms, it's Israel and Palestine. Although the eastern side of the Jordan Creek, because that's what it is really, we call it a river, it has always been part of the biblical land, but now politically it's in a country called Jordan, which the Brits created in about 1928, because they were giving jobs to each of their Arab friends. And they made one of them king of Saudi Arabia, they made another one king of Iraq, and they took one of the people from this Hashemite family and made that person king of Transjordan, king of the other side of Jordan, the other side of Jordan River. And it was part of the British plan to control the Middle East forever. And we all know how well that went. It's 1948, it all came crumbling down around their ears. So there's a bit of fluidity, as it were, about what is the Holy Land, but I'm going to focus primarily on the country of Israel, the landscapes of Israel and Palestine, and the sort of the eastern edge of the Jordan River. Give you a bit of a glimpse down in the desert as well. So why does this stuff matter? Well, landscape, along with weather patterns and climate, are there for the long haul. They last like forever. Now we know it's not forever, but once upon a time Australia was either connected to Africa or South America. I can't remember which bit we fit into with continental drift. That was so long ago that nobody remembers it. So even in terms of hundreds of thousands of years of human presence, the way the land looks in the eastern Mediterranean today is more or less how it has looked for the last 500,000 years and longer. So it's a given. Okay? Right there, come in. So it's in place for thousands, millions of years. It actually sets up the stage. You can do stuff, and you can only do stuff in this landscape that works with the soil, with the amount of rain, and with the amount of other kinds of water and so on. So if you don't have forests, or if you don't have big rivers, if you don't have natural harbours, all of those things are going to impact on what you do in this country. Okay? Of course, it can be modified, and the main ways that humans have modified it is trade. If someone is going to make money out of something, they'll find a way to make it happen. Okay? So if from time to time this bit of dirt has been on some significant trade routes, it's not at the moment. Why is it not at the moment? Because we have different technology. So we're not having to bring spices from India across to the Mediterranean coast by camel and then load them on ships and send them on to Rome. It comes other ways. So that's significant. And all the economic activity that goes with that particular trade has vanished because of technology. Similarly, once they developed the technology of iron working, they were able to cut cisterns in the limestone mountains in the middle of the country, and limestone mountains are not much good for farming. They're also very dry. They've got rain a couple of times a year. Around about 1200 they mastered iron working, and they were able to cut cisterns in the rock, capture the rainwater and hold it through the dry season. Then you can farm up there the kind of stuff you can farm on a dry, hilly landscape. Olives particularly grow well in that kind of area. If your country happens to be on the border, on the frontier of an empire, the government in the capital city is going to invest in your region. We know this. Okay, why is there money being spent in Darwin? okay, because it's strategically important that Australia have defence facilities up in the northwest. We don't have similar fortifications worrying about New Zealand, okay? But, you know, we are fortifying that. There's hardly anybody living up there, but we're spending a lot of money on defence infrastructure because it's the frontier. We're not spending money in the middle of the country because there's no strategic reason to do that. So when Palestine is in the middle of an empire, like the Roman Empire, which is much bigger, it doesn't get much attention from Rome. But when it becomes a border, a frontier state, then whichever empire is in power at the time is a bit more interested in what happens in Palestine. And when people chop down so many trees that they in fact take out all the trees from the landscape, then we have deforestation and we have deserts formed by human as a consequence of human activity. And that's what wiped out the Roman cities in North Africa, and they became desert. Because we cut down so many trees that we created the Sahara Desert. Okay? Those used to be thriving, firstly Phoenician, then Greek and then Roman cities. So we can make a difference to the landscape, but only within certain parameters. You can't go ice skating basically in the Sinai. It's never going to work. There's never going to be enough snow to do it. Okay? So this is the area we're looking at, and in particular we're looking at, the only bit we're really discussing is this area just from about here, maybe down here we talk about the Negev, but from here up to where you see the white bits there, that's the mountains of Lebanon. So that area there is what we're talking about. And up around us, of course, you've got Egypt, across here you've got Mesopotamia. Today it's Iran and Iraq. In the ancient times it was Babylon, Persia, so on. And the two great powers were the sort of river civilizations here, including the Assyrians up in the north, and the Egyptians. And these guys, when they wanted to go and attack the enemy in the north, whose backyard did they walk through? Because they didn't have aircraft carriers and they didn't have planes, so they had to move their soldiers. And they're not going to come through the desert, they're going to go up the coast. And they're going to feed their armies by taking your crops, thank you very much, and raping the women that are in the villages and so on. And when these guys are on a roll and they're pushing their influence as far as the Mediterranean, and they decide to come down and teach the Egyptians a lesson, they're going to come down the same coast, through the same villages, take the food off the same fields and attack Egypt. So, and nobody who's lived here has ever been powerful enough to have an empire that can go the other way. You just don't have the resources here that you get here with the Nile, or you get over here. The huge human civilizations developed 4,000 or 5,000 years BCE, and the biblical story of being in the land only starts around about 1200 or 1000 BCE. Okay, but these other empires have been going already for 4,000 years when David and Solomon perhaps start doing something here. So these are very much sort of, this is always the backyard of somebody else's empire. It's never the capital of an empire. There aren't enough people, there's not enough land, you can't develop enough wealth to develop the kind of power which would let you project out. So you're always going to be on the receiving end of other people's imperial ambitions. Conversely, we're so far away from everywhere that basically nobody ever attacks Australia because we're at the end of the railway line and there wasn't a railway line. But I mean, it's a long way to go to attack a very big country when the bit facing Asia is not very hospitable. So we've got the reverse because of our geography. We have a sun. So we have Fortress Australia because of our geography. They have sort of welcomed, in effect, this area, Palestine, Canaan, Israel, call it what you like, it's a bridge. And people walk over the bridge and they crash the place on their way. And this shows you some of that. We won't go into all the details, but this is just showing how over a couple of thousand years, everybody, so whether your empire is based in Egypt, or in Greece, which today is part of which we call Turkey, or whether your empire is based in the sort of, that part of the Middle East that is still so problematic to us, from Afghanistan through to Iran, to Iraq, that area of the world, guess what? It was a problem 3,000 years ago as well. And they're not actually trying to, they don't care. This is irrelevant. There's nothing there to capture. But it's a strategic access to get to the other guys. Okay? So, let's have a look at the Eastern Mediterranean. As we know, it's basic, we're going to talk about its basic geographical features, which are particularly the southern half of the Eastern Mediterranean has no natural harbours. So the people that live there are not going to build boats and explore the Mediterranean. Tiny bit further in Lebanon, you get Tyre and Sidon, famous maritime civilizations, who actually sent out what we call the Phoenicians, and they colonised North Africa. Remember, so Hannibal with his elephants almost conquered Rome. We almost lived under the whole sort of Phoenician Empire rather than the Roman Empire. That's how close that struggle was. So 100 or 200 k's further north, different ball game. Okay? And we are to the friends that I chat with in Israel and Palestine and so on, they can't believe how far we drive. Okay? Yeah. The whole of the country we're talking about today, I used to explain it when I was teaching as being in the Gold Coast hinterland. It would certainly fit within the northern rivers, not even the north coast, the northern rivers, except they don't have a single river. And I know you think the Clarence is better than the Richmond, but they don't have a river that counts against any of our creeks even. Okay, perhaps say Alumni Creek is about what the Jordan River is. Okay, so this will have an impact on communication in that the people living in Palestine are not going to be seafarers, but they're going to be constantly saying welcome to invading armies because that was the way to get to the other place. From their point of view, the sea was a place where you could fish, but it was a scary place and there were monsters out there. Sea monsters, dragons, all kinds of scary things, okay? And you get storms and you drown, and so the Israelites, the people that live in Canaan, whether they're Israelites, Palestinians, whatever, they're landlubbers, okay? They're not seafarers. Not a lot of rainfall. Think of it as being very much like Perth, southwest corner, south of Western Australia, a little bit like Adelaide. Technically it's what's called Mediterranean climate, because it was the Mediterranean. When I was at high school it was called West Coast Subtropical, whereas we have East Coast Subtropical here. West Coast, so it's much the same weather as ours, only upside down. They get wet winters, and in summer everything dies for lack of rain. Well, that's Palestine. Okay? They get about the same sort of rain you get in Adelaide or Perth. It does have some fertile land. It's not the land that flows with milk and honey. That was a very early real estate advertisement which Moses picked up in Egypt, and it wasn't really a good idea. Okay, it didn't work out that way. But it does have some fertile land. And there are one or two strategic locations because of the highways that traders and armies would use. Now, it's one thing to try and stop a caravan of merchants and say, before you pass our village, you have to part with some shekels, but you don't say that to Nebuchadnezzar. It's like, welcome, Your Majesty, what would you like for dinner? Okay, so you can see the problem of having a strategic location is an asset in good times and it's a problem in bad times because everybody wants to control that strategic bump. So, let's have a look at it. So it's part of the fertile, what we used to call the Fertile Crescent, stretching basically from Egypt up the coast of Palestine, up through Syria, the top of Syria, and then back through the what today is Iraq and western Iran. And that Fertile Crescent, if you're going to move, whether it's for a trade activity or whether it's because of imperial expansion, you're going to go where the grass is green because you're driving horses and camels and donkeys. Okay, they weren't using, there was lots of oil under the ground, but they didn't have internal combustion engines. They had no idea that stuff was any use to anybody. Okay, whether it is a whole other argument, I realise, but let's just leave that for now. So you're going to travel through the fertile areas, so that your herds can graze, and you're going to be able to get supplies either by paying for it or by demanding it from the locals. Okay. On either side of that, you get inhospitable territories, including the Arabian Desert, and the inhospitable territories for the people living on the land include the oceans, because them's are scary things. Okay. So that is going to impact, as I started out by saying, on the possibilities that are available for human activity in that space, given the technology is available at the time. Okay? So there are going to be interaction, and this point is saying that if you do have farmers that have carved out a life over several thousand years, growing crops, running herds and so on, and then you get the nomadic people that come through, and then you get the military people coming through, there are going to be structural interactions between those. So there's an ancient tension between the farmer and the pastoralists. People running goats and sheep want to be able to move to where the grass is green, but you don't want them coming to your valley when your crops are just beginning to look nice and green. But you do want them coming after harvest so the sheep can go poo 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 all over your paddock and give you fertiliser for next year. So you've got to work out. So the ancient story of Cain and Abel is a story about the hatred between the farmer and the shepherd. Okay? Sometimes you work it out, other times you don't. You mostly work it out when there's an even bigger bully who says, you two be nice or I will kill both of you. Sure, we'll work something out. Okay, so this is the bit we're looking at. Down the bottom here is what's left of the Dead Sea. We'll talk about that in a minute. And right up the top is what's called the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake Tiberias.
And so roughly that distance there is 200 km?
Okay. Nazareth is here, Jerusalem is here. As the crow flies, that's 100 km. So from there, so from the lake to the top of the Dead Sea would probably be less than 100 km, but not much less. Highway 90 runs down the western side of the river, and I could get from the city of Tiberias to Jerusalem in 2 hours if I strapped it a bit, because it's not a super highway and it's used by a lot of trucks. It's like the old Pacific Highway. If I came down Highway 6, which is a 6-lane super highway, the same distance is much quicker because the minimum speed is 120. That's the one with the red circle. That's what it means, doesn't it? The circle means nothing below this speed. That's what it means in Israel. If you're doing 125, they're behind you flashing their lights and blowing the horn to push you out of the way, and you drive this far off the car in front. Okay, at 130, 140 km. It's wonderful if you like that sort of thing. Anyway, so what are the peculiarities? Okay, we've mentioned some of this already. It's a land bridge between Asia, Africa, and Europe. If you want to walk there, you had to come through Palestine. From wherever you started, you had to go through Palestine if you're coming to or from Egypt, basically. There are no natural harbours, as you can see. The only thing approaching a natural harbour is this bump here, and today that's Haifa. But Haifa was only developed as a port in like the 18th century, 200 years ago, because the technology allowed different kind of shipping and so on. Coast of Palestine, it's like the 7 Mile Beach, but it goes for a couple of 100 kilometres. No major rivers. We'll have a look at some photos of the Jordan River. But the Jordan River and the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee are the northern remnant of the Great Rift Valley from East Africa. So there's a massive geological fault line that runs up from East Africa, up through the Red Sea, and then up through the Gulf of Aqaba, and then right up to the mountains of Lebanon here. And thousands of years ago, that was all ocean. And it has shrunk back to what is now called the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea. So this was deeper and wilder and an amazing place in the past. But slowly, firstly it's lost its access to the ocean. So this, as you know, has become a salt sea. What you probably don't know is it's about 38% mineral salts. So it's interesting. Slimy. Like too much washing up liquid in the sink.
Yeah.
That kind of slimy. Yeah, exactly. However, despite the fact that it's tiny and it has no natural harbours and no major rivers, it has several distinct local areas. And we're going to go on a photo tour of these 10 areas basically. Okay? So the first one is the coastal strip. And here on this map, the green indicates, all the colours indicate elevation. Okay. So green is relatively low, brown is higher, and white, up in the mountains of Lebanon, think snow, but it's basically saying it's a much higher elevation. It doesn't mean it's green, it just means it's flat, low. Okay? Okay, so the coastal strip is obviously where most people wanted to live in the past. That's where most Israelis live. That's interesting, that's where the Philistines used to live. The Israelites lived out here in the hill country, which was no good for farming, and the Philistines didn't want it. Guess what's happened? This is the West Bank, which sort of the Palestinians are being allowed to have, kind of. And the country of the Philistines, which is much better for farming and agriculture, has been taken by the Israelis. Okay, so that's coastal strip. The area 2 is called the Shephelah. It's the rolling hills. It's like, again, in Brisbane terms, it's like driving out through Marburg on your way to Toowoomba. You go over the Marburg Range. It's those rolling hills as you move from the flat coastal strip, begin to move up to the highlands, and so you go through some rolling hills. And this was the border country between Philistines and the Canaanites, between the Philistines and the Israelites. And it's border country because chariots are good on flat land. They're hopeless in the mountains. And on the hills, you might get away with scaring the natives if you turn up with a couple of hundred chariots. But if the natives are clever, they can run you into places where the chariots don't work, and then you're dead meat. Okay? So the Shephelah. 3 is the Judean hill country, and we're going to see there's actually a mountain ridge coming up here. There's a bit of a flat spot, and then it continues up